All right, so today, let's do a deep dive into something pretty delicious.
Oh, sounds fun.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at Spanish food vocabulary.
Nice.
Yeah. We're going to be using a video from a Spanish teacher named Jaime Lara.
Okay.
And he teaches Spanish to foreigners.
Mhm.
So whether you're planning a trip to Spain, learning the language, or just love expanding your culinary horizons, I think this is going to be really fun.
Yeah, I think you'll be surprised by how much food can actually, reveal about a culture.
Right.
We can definitely uncover some interesting insights today.
I think so, too. Okay, so let's get started with the basics drinks. It's interesting that agua, which is water, changes gender in Spanish.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's one of those, quirks that makes language so fascinating.
It is.
So el agua is masculine in singular form, but las aguas is feminine in plural form.
Huh?
So it's a good reminder to, pay attention to those little details.
Yeah.
And then there's cerveza, beer. And I learned that there are slang terms like birra and una cerve, which is so cool.
That's fun.
It's like having a secret code.
Exactly. It's those informal terms that can really make you feel like a local.
Yeah.
Like you're in on the joke,
Right, exactly.
And speaking of drinks, zumo means juice.
Uh-huh.
But you might also hear jugo in South America.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So many variations to keep track of.
Lots of variations.
That zumo de naranja orange juice is calling my name right now.
Ah, nice.
Okay, so moving on to solid foods, carne, or meat, seems like a good place to start.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, Spanish cuisine offers a whole variety of meats. You've got bistec for steak,
Okay.
filete, which is a thin steak,
Mm-hmm.
and lomo, which refers to the loin.
I'm already getting hungry.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget about macaroni, which falls under the broader category of pasta.
Of course.
And no Spanish meal would be complete without potatoes.
That's true. Although you'll often hear them called papas informally.
Right.
Just don't mix it up with papa, which means father.
Oh, that's a good one to remember.
Like you.
Now, on to the exciting part. Typical Spanish dishes. First up, the famous tortilla de patatas, or Spanish omelet.
Yes. This dish is more than just an omelet, though. It's almost like a cultural icon in Spain.
Wow.
There are endless variations from plain to onion with
Mhm.
onions or peppers.
Mhm.
And, there's actually a huge debate about whether onions belong in a true tortilla de patatas.
Oh, really? I had no idea it was so controversial.
Oh, yeah.
That's fascinating.
Big debate. So then we have to talk about soup.
Okay.
In Spanish, it's sopa,
Mm-hmm.
if it's just broth. But if you add rice or noodles, it becomes puchero.
Interesting. Is there a reason for that specific distinction?
Well, it might be connected to, the heartiness of the dish.
Okay.
Puchero often refers to, a more substantial stew, almost a meal in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And what's even more intriguing is that the phrase hacer pucheros actually means to cry in Spanish.
Wow, that's a connection I wouldn't have expected. Why would soup be associated with crying?
Well, there are a few theories.
Okay.
One is that the, puffed up cheeks of someone eating a hearty puchero resemble the face of a crying person.
Oh, okay.
Another suggests that puchero was a common meal for those who were poor or mourning, hence the association with sadness.
That adds a whole other layer to the meaning of the dish.
It does.
So much more than just a word, isn't it?
Absolutely. Language and culture are just so intertwined.
Right.
And speaking of delicious soups, have you ever tried salmorejo?
I haven't. What is it exactly?
It's a cold tomato soup that originated in Cordoba.
Okay.
It's creamy, flavorful, and there are many variations in texture and toppings.
Mm-hmm.
Some versions are smooth, while others are chunkier.
Mm-hmm.
It really highlights the diverse nature of Spanish cuisine.
Okay, that one is definitely going on my list to try. Now let's move on to something a little lighter fruits and vegetables, starting with the classic manzana, which is apple.
Yeah, you'll find both red and green apples in Spain.
Uh-huh.
The green variety is often called manzana golden. But if you're in Andalusia, you might hear it called perro instead.
Oh, wow. So even something as simple as an apple has regional variations.
Right.
It's amazing how language evolves differently in each area. And then there's zanahoria for carrot, where the H is silent.
Right, exactly. It's those little pronunciation quirks that can trip you up, right?
Totally.
And since we're talking about tricky pronunciations, let's clarify the difference between plátano and banana.
Ah, yes. Plantains versus bananas always gets me confused.
They are similar, but plátano specifically refers to a plantain, which is starchier and often used in savory dishes.
Okay,
The Canary Islands are known for their plantain production, by the way.
I'll have to keep that in mind for my next trip. Now, Jaime Lara really focuses on the Andalusian region in his video, especially Huelva.
Yes, and he explains how the people from Huelva, called choqueros, got their nickname because of the abundance of chocos, cuttlefish, in the area. It's a great example of how food becomes intertwined with, local identity.
It really shows how food is more than just sustenance. It's a part of history and culture. Speaking of Huelva, he also mentions a local delicacy, gamba blanca de Huelva.
Ah, yes, the famous white shrimp from Huelva. And of course, we can't forget about jamón serrano, the dry-cured ham.
Right.
Yabugo in Andalusia is renowned for producing some of the highest quality jamón.
It's amazing how specific regions become known for certain foods. And the Andalusian coast seems like a seafood lover's paradise. He talks about langostinos for prawns and churlas for clams.
Yeah. He also mentions puntilitas, those small squid that are often fried, and morama, which is dried tuna, and then there are coquinas, those tiny wedge clams. So much pescado to enjoy.
I'm getting a serious craving for seafood tapas right now. All this talk of food has got me thinking. It's amazing how even within, one country, you find so many different culinary traditions. Totally. Each region with its own, special dishes and flavors.
It really is. And, it's not just about the ingredients themselves.
Right.
It's the cooking techniques and traditional recipes, and even the way food is served. It all contributes to that regional culinary identity.
So true. Okay, so we talked about drinks, meats, and seafood. What other, essential ingredients are there in Spanish cuisine?
Well, we can't forget about the foundation of so many dishes, ajo, which is garlic,
Right.
and cebolla, onion. These two are, essential in Spanish cooking.
Oh, yeah. I can only imagine the incredible aroma of those two cooking together.
Oh, it's so good.
It's like the base for so many flavor profiles.
It is. And speaking of bases for things, bread is an absolute staple when it comes to Spanish cuisine. Jaime Lara mentions pan as the general term for bread, but he also highlights a smaller, rounder type called a bolnito.
Okay, so I'm picturing those crusty rolls, perfect for dipping into soups or sauces. And speaking of, what about Spanish sandwiches? Are there any specific types that stand out?
Oh, of course. So you have the bocadillo, which is the classic Spanish sandwich, which you can also call a bocasa for short.
Okay.
And they're incredibly versatile and come with all sorts of fillings.
It's funny how some words just sound inherently delicious. Like bocadillo has a nice ring to it, don't you think?
It does. It really does. And now, how about we switch gears to something a little bit sweeter? We can't forget about dessert.
Yes, let's explore the sweeter side of Spanish food vocabulary. What kinds of treats are we talking about?
Well, you have galletas for cookies.
Yep.
And bizcocho for biscuits.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's helado, which is ice cream. Spain actually has a rich tradition of ice cream making that dates back centuries.
Oh, really? I had no idea. So it's not just a modern treat.
Not at all. During the Moorish rule in Spain, they introduced techniques for making ice cream using snow from the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing how historical influences really shape culinary traditions, isn't it?
It is. And for those special occasions, I imagine there's tarta or cake.
Of course. And then to add that extra touch of sweetness, there's meal, which is honey,
Yeah.
or chocolate.
Right.
I'm particularly fond of Spanish chocolate. It has such a rich, intense flavor.
Yeah. Speaking of rich flavors, what about oils and fats? Those are pretty essential in any cuisine, right?
They are, yeah. So aceite means oil.
Okay.
And olive oil, in particular, is a cornerstone of Spanish cooking. And then you have mantequilla, which is butter, for adding that richness and smooth texture.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how certain ingredients are so central to a cuisine. Olive oil is really the heart of Mediterranean cooking.
It really is.
And along with those basic fats, what about spices and condiments?
Well, Jaime Lara focuses mostly on core vocabulary, so he doesn't delve too deep into specific spices.
Yeah.
But he does mention sal for salt and azúcar for sugar.
Right. Those are the essentials, the building blocks of flavor.
Yeah.
I can only imagine Spanish cuisine uses a wide array of spices and herbs to create those unique tastes.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of those spices have a long history in Spain, dating back to the spice trade routes. Think saffron, paprika, cumin, the list goes on.
It seems like there's just so much depth to explore in Spanish food culture beyond just the basic vocabulary.
There is, yeah. And while we've covered a lot of ground, I think it's worth revisiting those Andalusian specialties for a moment.
Okay, yeah.
We talked about seafood, but there's like even more to discover in that region.
Yeah, let's dive back into Andalusia and those regional delicacies. So we already touched on the gamba blanca de Huelva and the jamón serrano from Yabugo.
Right, right.
And of course, that connection between the chocos and the nickname for people from Huelva, the choqueros. It's a fun fact that really highlights how food is just woven into the fabric of a place.
It is. It's those little details that make it so fascinating, right?
Yeah, what other specialties come to mind when you think about that region?
Well, there's the puntalitas, which are small squid that are often fried.
Okay.
And let's not forget about the mohama, which is dried tuna,
No.
a delicacy with a long tradition in Andalusia.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the coquinas, those tiny wedge clams that are so flavorful.
It sounds like Andalusia is a must-visit for seafood lovers.
Absolutely. And, it's not just about the seafood. Andalusia has a diverse culinary landscape, really influenced by its history and geography.
Yeah. All this talk about Spanish food has really sparked my curiosity. I'm starting to understand how much food can really reveal about a culture.
It's true. It's like a window into history, tradition, and even like values.
Yeah.
And Spanish cuisine, with its regional variations and rich history, it offers like a fascinating glimpse into the heart of Spanish culture.
I couldn't agree more. And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of delicious ground today.
I think so too.
Are we ready to wrap up our deep dive into Spanish food vocabulary?
I think so. Yeah, we've explored a wide range of terms from like everyday staples to these regional specialties.
Yeah.
And we even touched on some really interesting cultural insights along the way.
It's been quite a culinary adventure, so are you ready to share some, final thoughts with our listeners?
I am, yeah. I think, the key takeaway here is that learning about food, it's about so much more than just memorizing words.
Right.
It's about understanding the stories and the history, the culture that's woven into every dish.
Right, exactly.
And as we've seen, Spanish food vocabulary is just such a delicious entry point into the rich tapestry of Spanish culture.
Beautifully said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Spanish food vocabulary, what were some of the highlights for you?
Oh, man. It's hard to choose just a few.
I know, right?
But I think what stood out to me the most was how much depth there is to even the simplest Spanish food words.
Yeah.
It's not just about translation. It's about history, culture, those regional variations.
I completely agree. How agua changes gender, or the debate about onions and tortilla patatas. Those details really bring it to life. And I loved learning about that connection between puchero and crying. Who knew soup could be so emotionally charged?
I know. It's funny, right?
Yeah.
Those little connections are what make exploring a new language so fascinating. And for me, it was those regional variations that really captured my imagination. Like the fact that a green apple can be called manzana golden or pero, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
It just shows how language is constantly evolving and adapting.
Absolutely. And it makes you want to travel and experience those nuances firsthand. Imagine ordering a pero in Andalusia, and seeing the look on the locals' faces.
Exactly. It's those kinds of experiences that make language learning so rewarding.
Totally. So before we go, as we leave our listener with a final thought, what would you say is the most important thing to remember from our Spanish food vocabulary deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is that language is a window into a culture. And food in particular is such a rich and vibrant aspect of any culture. So as you learn these new Spanish food words, don't just focus on memorizing them. Try to understand the stories behind them. Explore those regional differences, the historical influences, the cultural significance. That's really where the magic of language learning lies.
Beautifully put. It's not just about the words themselves, it's about the world that they unlock.
Exactly.
Now, if you'll allow me to steal your signature line, what dish is our listener most curious to try now? I know I have a whole list.
Oh, I'm right there with you. From the hearty puchero to the refreshing salmorejo, the crispy puntilitas to the sweet helado Spanish cuisine has something to offer everyone. So go explore, experiment, and just savor those flavors of Spain.
Buen provecho.
Well, that was fun. Until next time.